Hola a todos. Bienvenidos el día de hoy a esta charla que vamos a tener entre el Centro Cultural Universitario Tlatelolco y la Galería de Davidson College. Nos acompañan hoy Lorena Mal, artista multidisciplinar que trabaja muy particularmente con el archivo y el patrimonio cultural intangible. Tiene un trabajo muy profundo sobre la dimensión sonora y cómo emplazar estas investigaciones de archivo y del patrimonio cultural tangible e intangible en las exposiciones de arte contemporáneo que ha trabajado no solo en México, sino en Estados Unidos, en Europa, en fin. Lorena Mal, además, es una queridísima colaboradora del Centro Cultural Universitario Tlatelolco ya desde hace algunos años y artista que está exponiendo en nuestra actual exposición temporal, Renombrar el Mundo, Expediciones Botánicas de la Nueva España. También nos acompaña Leah Newman, quien es curadora y directora de la Van Avery Smith Galleries en Davidson College desde enero del 2013 y completó su licenciatura en Historia del Arte y su especialidad en Estudio General con especializaciones en escultura y fotografía en Winthrop University. Recibió su maestría en Duke University, que es así de estas universidades claves para este tipo de discusiones. Las responsabilidades de Lía incluyen ser la curadora de este espacio, desarrollar una programación centrada en las exposiciones y contribuir al crecimiento de la colección del arte de Davidson College, que también abarca la colección de escultura en el campus. Lía además trabajó este año con Lorena Mal para la exposición Witness Trees, de la cual también platicaremos el día de hoy, precisamente para entrelazar ambas exposiciones y las piezas que dialogan entre sí, no solo las piezas, sino también los territorios y las prácticas curatoriales, artísticas y de investigación que tenemos entre estos dos espacios. Yo me presento, soy Sofia Carrillo, curadora y gestora cultural. Trabajo en la coordinación de artes visuales del Centro Cultural Universitario Tlatelolco, un espacio que implica muchos retos a nivel de investigación y curatoriales, pero que me tocan profundamente en mi investigación sobre el archivo y el arte contemporáneo, así como poder entender cómo emplazar la memoria y cómo trabajar críticamente con distintas dimensiones de la historia. Es una zona que geográficamente se construye desde el Cenozoico y conforma pues uno de los islotes planos que tenía el lago de Texcoco, rodeado de estas aguas salobres y de un eje volcánico que rodea la Ciudad de México. Es además el espacio de tepanecas, de emplazamientos tepanecas, y también pues un territorio sumamente importante para la historia mexica. Es aquí precisamente donde se da la última batalla, el último resabio de resistencia de mexicas contra tlaxcaltecas, otomíes y españoles durante las guerras de conquista. Pero es también aquí el espacio de resiliencia, de construcción de comunidad y de lucha, digamos, que caracteriza mucho este espacio cultural llamado Centro Cultural Universitario Tlatelolco. Es también este espacio icónico por la construcción de una utopía moderna en los años 50, con la construcción de la zona habitacional Nonoalco-Tlatelolco, una utopía arquitectónica que efectivamente construye un ideal arquitectónico para una clase media, pero a costa del desplazamiento de una zona que llevaba siglos de pauperización. Y por supuesto, para quienes viven en México o estudian los movimientos sociales, es también el escenario en 1968 de la matanza de los estudiantes aquí en México. Entonces, efectivamente, digamos, está marcado este territorio, está lleno de cicatrices, hay varias heridas de las cuales hablar, pero es también un espacio de resistencia, es un espacio de lucha y es un territorio que guarda memoria más allá del espacio per se, de la historia per se. Es un espacio que en su propia territorialidad nos puede hablar desde la naturaleza como un testigo, digamos, de todos estos sucesos. Pero es también espacio de construcción cultural y escenario, pues, digamos, no solo del sincretismo, sino también de estos espacios también de lucha dentro de la cultura. De manera que el perfil curatorial para este espacio se vuelve muy complejo porque habría que revisar estos momentos históricos de Tlatelolco en diálogo con lo contemporáneo. Es una revisión crítica, pero que trae a la actualidad desde las voces de artistas y agentes culturales pues bueno, actuales. Es también un espacio de construcción de comunidad. Constantemente estamos trabajando con nuestro entorno y, pues bueno, un lugar ideal para poder platicar y analizar y confrontarnos también desde las teorías decoloniales.
Thanks so much for inviting me and also for that history. I was able to pick up a little bit of what you were talking about. So, as you mentioned, I've been the curator and director here at the Van Avery Smith Galleries at Davidson College for about 10 years. And we're part of Davidson College, which is located in the southeastern United States. The college was founded in 1837, which is about 30 years before the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved people in our country. I think your words were something around the curatorial comes from a critical perspective, and I think that's been really key to my job as well. Being part of an academic institution, I think my job as a curator is to really present challenging works of art, guide some conversations that otherwise might be difficult. And that has meant mostly supporting the work of artists who are making work around social and political concerns. A lot of the projects that I'm interested in are interdisciplinary. We are an institution where our audience is diverse and not everyone is well versed in the language of contemporary art. We know sort of on the inside, I think that contemporary art can be challenging, it can be arcane. And so for me, we've really tried to build in different access points for our audience so that they can use whatever language or discipline they're most familiar with and have some way into the work. It could be history or biology or environmental studies, any sort of array of disciplines or ideas that they may come to the work with. And if they can find that entry point, I think something that is challenging, something that comes from our past, something that feels like it's not relatable or important to their life can suddenly somehow be made to feel pertinent or necessary. Or relevant to them in some capacity. Over the past couple of years, we have started inviting artists into our own archives as a way of helping us reckon with our history. I mentioned that we were founded in 1837. Buildings on our campus were physically built by enslaved laborers. We continued the practice of exploiting people for many years after the Civil War. And we exist on the ancestral homelands of the Catawba Nation. So we have started working with artists as a way of helping us reckon with our history. There's been something that's sort of magical, I think, that can happen when we can kind of get together around a work of art or an installation or some sort of project that we can see in a different way through an artist, and it just somehow becomes an easier dialogue. So this year we opened our academic year with 3 exhibitions that were all sort of related. We first hosted an exhibition by one of our faculty members, Katie St. Clair. She's a painter, and she created a new body of work that was primarily based on immersing herself in the natural environment across different cultures and landscapes, which included the US, it included a remote area of Canada and Ireland. And then we also opened an exhibition with an artist named Susan Harbage Page, and her work, much like Lorena's, is kind of starts from an archive, although she's making an archive. She's creating an archive through photos and collected objects and performative interactions over the last 15 years that have been on the US-Mexico border. And we invited Lorena here as a way of pushing that conversation to think about the territory or the land as an archive. And really, the invitation to Lorena was open-ended. We approached this with the idea that we were interested in the work. We were interested in what Lorena might have to say if she came to North Carolina, explored this space, explored our campus, and we left it sort of open. And I think that's been really exciting for me, is to be able to work with artists that I can trust and just kind of see what happens when they begin to kind of dig into our history. So I think that's a good place to stop, maybe.
Gracias, Sofía, y gracias, Lía. Yo me voy a arrancar de aquí un poquito a empezar a hablar del proyecto que compartimos. Y bueno, muchas gracias por permitir el diálogo y la conexión entre geografías, espacios y las formas que tenemos todas de construir en común. Me parece una oportunidad muy preciada como para poder expandir la forma en la que entendemos la memoria y los archivos a través del proyecto. Salmodia Natural y Tlatelolco, y a partir como también de las diferentes prácticas, tanto en su exhibición colectiva en Tlatelolco como en la exhibición en la Smith Gallery de Davidson College que presento, se llama Witness Trees. Este proyecto inició en 2020 a partir de la invitación de Sofía y el Centro Cultural Tlatelolco, para el que revisamos distintos archivos y registros de lo que fue el colegio, en busca principalmente de documentos musicales, porque nos interesaba mucho la dimensión sonora del proceso colonial, y que a la par de trabajar en un proceso maravilloso que desarrollamos con canto llano, Sofía me presentó la investigación de Berenice Alcántara sobre la Salmodia cristiana, que es un libro de cantos, o sea, de salmos, que es básicamente una guía para cantar y acompañar ciertos versos según el calendario del año, que es el calendario litúrgico cristiano, ¿no? Este libro fue escrito entre 1558 y 1583. Es un compendio escrito en náhuatl, escrito por Bernardino de Sahagún, de hecho el único libro que él vio terminado en vida, en el que se integra composiciones de varios informantes de Tlatelolco, de Azcapotzalco y de Cuautitlán, llamados los informantes de Tepepulco, para el que compilaron composiciones poéticas o cantares en náhuatl populares que les sirvieran para la redacción del libro, cuya idea era adoctrinar hacia el cristianismo. Y sin embargo, lo que sucede en esta integración es que terminan registrando una serie de imágenes poéticas sobre el paisaje o la idea del paisaje precolonial con el que había una relación afectiva. Ciertas flores nativas y medicinales, ciertos árboles, ciertas piedras preciosas, ciertas aves, que no solo traen consigo una concepción ambiental, sino también íntimamente espiritual y llena de significado existencial. Es un libro que puede parecer un libro religioso más, ¿no? Hasta que al leerlo con atención aparecen una y otra vez esta poesía o cantos al paisaje. Y la pregunta era cómo nos relacionamos con esto, ¿no? O sea, con una distancia de casi 500 años con nosotras, ¿no? Y mi forma de sentir una cercanía fue buscar qué sigue aquí. Fue un proceso de casi 2 años de investigación de todo tipo, de ir a los viveros a preguntar, de preguntar a biólogos, de buscar en las calles, en las afueras de la ciudad, de buscar en libros y archivos de traducciones de estas especies del náhuatl, el nombre científico, el nombre común, que en muchos casos ambos han cambiado en diferentes momentos, como dónde está la Tecomatzóchitl, que es la copa de oro, ¿no? Dónde está la Cacalotzóchitl, que es la flor de mayo, dónde está el coquito, ¿no? La Tzilozóchitl, la flor huacal, que aún no la encuentro, la Huacalotzóchitl, porque la confunden con el alcatraz de Diego Rivera, que es realmente africano. Y dónde están las magnolias, ¿no? La Yolosóchitl y la Lotzóchitl, entre varias otras, ¿no? Fue un proceso muy profundo en el que en algunos casos, como en algunas flores de mayo que tenemos en un huerto familiar que comparto, conseguí la planta, pero todavía no era época de floración, y era esperar meses y pensar ojalá y floreen, esperar y poder ver cómo son las flores, y cuando por fin aparecieron era pensar también la flor como escultura, como un momento en el que culmina el trabajo arduo de la planta y construye eso que sin ser preservado dura un par de días, ¿no? O sea, se desprende, se muere, regresa a la tierra, y además que al estar florando en lugares diferentes, ¿cómo le hacía para estar presente en esos pocos días que sucede? Por lo que fue un proceso que pidió ser colectivo, en el que muchas flores fueron colectadas por gente querida, amigas que recolectaron de algún árbol cercano o por el que pasaban, y en el caso de las primeras magnolias que colecté en México fue ir a la mitad de la pandemia al jardín de un amigo, ¿no? Felipe, cenamos y luego nos presentó a 2 árboles que marcaban es la basura, indudablemente es la Ciudad de México. Y en el caso de las primeras magnolias, bueno, pues ahí fui con Felipe, que cenamos y luego nos presentó estos 2 árboles que marcan el lugar en donde están esparcidas las cenizas de sus abuelos, y que al recolectar las flores era como saber que también sus abuelos son parte de ellas, ¿no? Es decir, recolectar las flores se volvió una forma de dialogar con este archivo, pero también con un paisaje previo, un paisaje presente y una continuidad generacional humana y no humana, ¿no? Entonces, por eso creo que es muy, muy bello también escuchar también no solamente este contexto de la obra, sino también empezar a ir a escuchar a Sofía hablar del paisaje justamente que compete Tlatelolco, que compete toda esta zona, pero también empezar como a pensar también en el paisaje del que habla esta Lía, ¿no? Para estas obras, o sea, los libros como obras surgieron entonces de todo ese proceso de prestar atención a lo que parecía de fondo. Reproducí las menciones del paisaje en el texto, que se vuelve casi como un libro de poesía concreta, porque hay muchos, como modernista, porque hay muchos vacíos, así como paisaje de fondo que están en las ilustraciones, y también los registros casuales como grafiteos o anotaciones casuales de quién usó el libro, hay acordeones, incluso también hay marcas de humedad, las manchas y el rastro de bichos que se han ido comiendo como las hojas durante estos años, mostrando digamos que lo que estaba en el margen, haciendo el paisaje o entorno ya no un fondo, sino el lugar en el que estamos, que ha quedado, y en un sentido material y territorial, y también qué puede continuar y repararse, o sea, qué relaciones no se han roto del todo. Hay 2 libros en Tlatelolco, uno con flores de copa de oro recolectadas en Veracruz por la curadora y amiga Mariel Vera, que acompañó la investigación, y el otro libro contiene flores de mayo recolectadas en nuestro huerto, así como unas donadas por la artista y amiga Circe Iracema, que todas son flores que sigo y seguiré recolectando. Hace poco me encontré en la casa, una casa por San Jerónimo, una copa de oro también, invitando a quienes miran a su alrededor y sigamos prestando atención. Y el libro, ¿no? O sea, uso el dispositivo del libro como forma de conservación en el presente, ¿no? Que es una invitación a pensar el futuro en un pasado no solo más visible, sino literalmente muy vivo, o sea, con quienes compartimos también como estas historias, ¿no? O sea, aunque la mayoría son historias de conflicto por el territorio. Entonces, Lía, in terms of questions about the land, in the case of the exhibition at Smith Gallery at North Carolina, the Magnolia opened a wider perspective over landscape in the Americas. over territory and uses and becomings, no? That first begin knowing the context of the show and the fact that they have an arboretum with many magnolias around. Also knowing it is a zone with a lot of natural parks and projects of conservation that have a different story, since while in Mexico it was clearly a colonial displacement of many of these trees that are not so common anymore. In the US, the magnolia, as an example, is kept as a very strong identifier of the South, and they call it the Southern magnolia. It is a flower mentioned and used by women, even in the South, in the movement of jazz and soul of the South. And so they call it, and it's a tree that becomes a landmark, that to reveal like past uses of different lands, as in the case of plantations or indigenous territories. For these flowers, Leah and her team at the gallery helped looking for magnolias, and they carefully pressed them before my arrival to work on the show. And since when I will be arriving, it will be no longer their blooming season. And later on, when I arrived, as she mentioned, they made possible for me to visit around the city, to all neighboring cities and parks, to connect the stories over the land, which was sometimes painful, like to be looking at a history that appears very clean as something to move on from even, but that still urgently needs to be addressed in the present. So Leah, maybe you would like to talk a little bit. I wanted to mention to kind of bridge between Sofia and you in terms of both exhibition spaces, but also in terms of the practice. So maybe you want to talk about the process with exhibition in terms of participation and the dialogue of how recent projects in the galleries have led to connect between communities, research, and artistic practice, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, so one of the projects that sort of wrapped up while Lorena was on campus also involved plants. This project in particular involved corn. I don't want to get too deep into the project, but it was conceived of by Nicholas Galanin, who's a Tlingit artist from Alaska, in collaboration with the Catawba, who I mentioned we are on their ancestral homeland. And the way that the project began, it was sort of conceived as a year-long project that the community would build. We created a sort of burial site for the monument of Andrew Jackson, the one that stands in Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. Andrew Jackson was certainly not the only person with negative impact on Indigenous people, but he was certainly the president that had the greatest impacts, negative impacts. And he is from this area. He was actually born in sort of around where the Catawba land would have been. The idea for the artist and for the Catawba collaborators was that we would sort of make this burial to this genocidal monument. Together as a community, we would amend the soil. We learned about, composting. We readied the soil, and then we planted Catawba corn, which had not been grown in about 30 or so years. And the idea was like really transitioning it to this garden, something that was more restorative. And it was also about returning the site to what it may have been before Davidson College. When the Catawba were here, it would have been a place to grow crops, and including corn. The site, we also learned, which is adjacent to the Visual Arts Center, was also the antebellum era home of our president, the college president at the time, during, pre-Civil War. And so this would have also been a site where a garden would have existed then. It was most certainly tended by enslaved people, likely women. There would have been a kitchen. They would have cooked. And so there was this idea of sort of returning the site, but in a restorative way. And the project was about planting corn, which was something that the Catawba wanted to reintroduce into their culture. They wanted to build their seed collection, but it was much more than about the actual corn, right, as something that we eat. And I think that's true about your project too, Lorena, is that it's the plant, sure, and it's the soil, but it's the link to history and tradition and culture and really trying to better understand those things through the plant. And when you are talking about the magnolia tree, so many of these trees on our campus have been here so long. They have, as their title suggests, they've sort of witnessed and hold the past, including trauma. But I think what we're trying to do with these projects is think about how we can work together to move forward in some capacity. And so actually, I have a question for you because I want to hear about working from archives, working from a place that where you have to come in and sort of quickly try to understand a place and understand this, sort of sensitively respond, particularly when it's not your own culture. And clearly that's about community engagement and the way that you sort of bring people into your project.
I mean, my work with archives, which actually, I mean, as I mentioned before, that somehow for this project, it started kind of like that because we were interested in the remains of music in a process of deep conflict. And in a way, it's kind of like following through what escapes actually that, you know, like what actually challenged the idea of maybe even the things that seem stable and just and something that you give for granted. So somehow my practice has become like that. It's a capacity, or more like a practice that I consider more close to listening, to approach something that is the volatile, but also what leaves kind of a mark, and then how you kind of, you have to give time for that attention, and you have to kind of give also, you work through that, and then you ask it questions, you look around like from different perspectives, and there's no way that after that time that you gave, you don't start building, you know, for me, emotional bonds to what you are dealing with, and to feel how it kind of like what asks of you, but also how can you ask in return. And so I think that in this, in a funny way, I feel that process became very interesting, like when working with for the exhibition of I mean, I already worked with these pieces in the context of Mexico, and it was kind of this learning of recognition of being from this land and eating from this land and becoming this land. But then this moment of having a wider perspective through a wider dimension of time and place and crossing of territories, also with the US, and what is my, and how do I have, how do I kind of relate to that other territory, right? But in a way, I feel that when you are relating with the unknown, or with it or with something that feels maybe of the other, right? It's to find kind of a freedom of being there, trying to listen and offer, but also to move through language, and in a way that is not about what is fixed or right, but is more about what can we both relate to, like even though the struggle could be different, like we can find like a core or of relation between each other's stories. So it's like also welcoming difference in a way, like finding a way to communicate that allows openness and allows difference. So it's not about becoming the other, or or talking the story of others, but it's more like how do we move through history, move through the past, move through places in a way that we can allow that openness of not neither saying anything for the other, but also like being open ourselves to become also to change through where we move through.
I think that makes sense in the way that you sort of conceptually worked, and also the way that you physically worked in the space, that it was the doors were open, the exhibition sort of unfolded in a way in front of people. I think so often in the gallery, we close the doors, we don't want anybody to see sort of like the messy parts of making an exhibition, making the work, and then we sort of unveil it like it's magic. We reveal this show, and having the gallery open as a studio and having people come in and out throughout the process, I think it really made them feel like it was their project with you, that there was less of a hierarchy and it was more about sort of creating something special together. Yeah, so I appreciate that so much.
I think that's really beautiful. It really felt like that, and there was a moment of, and I feel that it's like recognizing what is the thing that holds us, that we can share, but then allow to kind of have this relationship of discovery, of mutual discovery, of our own making of senses, of stories through things, like not arriving. For me, it was also challenging because I feel that I've been working towards that in very long-term projects, in how I relate to collective research with curators, with people in culture, like how I work as an artist. Like I've been working towards that kind of mutual discovery and openness, and it was challenging and beautiful to see how we could learn and experiment, like through the becoming of the exhibition, and sharing kind of like sharing questions together.
I actually believe that you constantly work also with process, with open process through your artwork, and actually that openness could build a new kind of memory. And it's beautiful because actually the body starts talking through the archive, but not just your body, but the bodies that surrounds you, right? The bodies of the people that starts making this collective research with you, or even your constant participation with the curators. Not all artists do that. As well as the body of the materials, or the body of the emplacement. And I think that's a very interesting dimension that you constantly work in your art. Like, for example, the materials of the book, or the materials that are not present but are suggested, like the sound, or the territory as well, the soil, and the climate and time, because time is not there physically, but it is. I mean, if you start with making like a little insight of how you have to recollect all these plants, or how you could understand the history and the wounds, or how you start working collectively. I mean, this process means time, and it's in there. It's reflected in the books. So I think it's powerful. You actually use some Nahuatl terms that you can speak of.
Oh, we were mentioning that term when we were speaking about this conversation of how, and actually that led us through the notion of the body in as a practice, and as how to engage with memory, and how to make things your own without that meaning that it's not open, and that it's not porous, which had to do with which also has to do with a lot of listening, which is the Nahua concept of Isanaka, no, that I was mentioning, to recall, like it's a word that describes the sound of corn leaf, like wind going through corn leaf and making that kind of like screechy sound. I don't know how to describe it so well in English, but which is the same sound as someone would be doing, like passing pages through a book. And I felt that it was so beautiful. I mean, maybe it appeared very important to me, as I was not only experiencing my own working on the exhibition, but also was experiencing also a very beautiful happening through the works that were happening through in the other galleries, and the works with the community, and what Leah shared about bringing back corn in this in this in the land, well, in the neighboring parts of the gallery, which is to reckon what it used to be there. And so somehow, as a sound that maybe guides in a way to blur kind of the difference between cultural and nature, in the sense of how, the book itself, I don't know, like the Salmo de Naturalis, the work that is the central part of the exhibition at Davidson. I feel that more than this, it could appear like a kind of erasure, like the way it is treated, which was also, I wanted to mention it earlier, like how this perspective, when I was working on the book, I didn't kind of make so much, it wasn't so clear to me that I was recalling an archive that is no longer in Mexico. It's an archive that was produced here, and then the only way that we could go through it, it was because of a digitalization and conservation project, since it is now in a collection in the US, in the Brown's Garden Library in Rhode Island. And so I realized that more clearly when I was in the US, that I've made kind of like my own reclaiming of that document, of that archive, but definitely not in a sense of bringing it back or recovering of sorts in a sort of a savior position, or even a position of questioning patrimony, heritage, or the truth of a document that can bring back kind of a past vision of the landscape. But it was more about how it was about the landscape itself, like it was really keeping on to listen and to be part of the of that learning, of that exchange, through to understanding it as a landscape that holds much more than the human, like that. And this document somehow like could relate to it. It becomes like a very interesting point, which the same as the sound of corn and pages, like because it's this book that becomes suddenly closer to soil. It becomes a little more tree-like, like to gather it with a bark, to work with a paper that it's a certain quality, and to that to feel very real, like to feel very earth, like you can touch, you can very much touch things, and it's something that also that kind of allowing through my experience, but the experience of others, which was also important in terms of working with the ramp earth, in Davidson, was for us all to be able to touch that same thing that we give for granted again, even the soil that we step on all the time, and how can we have a relationship with that again, or renew a relationship with that.
I believe it's pretty interesting because what you are working with is, well, as I read it, it's somehow an embodiment of the archive. Because first of all, you bring it to yourself. Actually, you bring it to your own history, to your own interests. But afterwards, nature just starts speaking by itself, right? So when you try to translate the archive to a new object, the bark, the texture, and the lightness, or not, of the paper that you would have to use for these books, similar to the one that was used during the 17th century. The collecting of the flowers, how to dry them, for how long. I mean, even the time that I already spoke about, this timeline and the materials, it's part of this embodiment of the archive, which also means a performative dimension of all this that maybe is not in front of the exhibition, but it's part of the process. And I think it's very important for both spaces, for Davidson College as well as for us, to talk about this, to talk about the embodiment of the processes of history, right?
Yeah, we I don't know, I was thinking about inviting Leah to mention something, and I actually remembered the tiredness of our bodies when we were like stepping onto soil. But what you say, Sofia, and I will switch maybe to Spanish a little bit, just to mention kind of like the intersection with the other exhibition, which is Renaming the World, like Renombrar al Mundo. In this sense of what we do and how that relates us differently to a present, to a very deep present that is that it brings on the past, not in a sense of nostalgia or in a sense of things that already passed, but in a sense of actually things that are very, very much present, but they become invisible, or they become very volatile, like to talk through, and that there are certain things that we can pull them back, or like unearth them again, like certain like tipping points that, and through language, through certain like certain clues, the flowers themselves, that we can bring them back, and maybe that relation with the naming of things that you can recall.
I'm really interested in knowing more about the exhibition that you all have worked on, because when I think about your exhibition at Davidson, it's like very clear to me that you have created sort of an expanded book. That the way that you've sort of set up the gallery, it sort of is like an open book. The sort of enlarged page of the drawing, the graphic images, the idea of being sort of immersed in the soil walls, even the way that the photographs are installed, they sort of come out from the corner and are like the page, the way they sort of mirror an open book. And so to me, that sort of reinforces this idea of like the embodiment of the archive, that we are fully surrounded and immersed immersed in this. I don't know. It's still working a lot of it out, but it feels like the exhibition is the archive, is the book. It is a book.
I believe we could just keep talking and talking, and I mean, this is a beautiful and actually, yes, a profound and poetic talk between the three of us. I believe there are a lot of terms that we can share between these two territories, of course, and I think it's also very beautiful to bring Nahuatl as well as part of this research, because I don't know, something like Izanaka, for example, just bring us some other dimension that cross borders, that cross research, that cross actually our own bodies, sound, and as well as air, or the remembrance of the territory. It's something that could make us transport ourselves to these territories, or to imagine some way or somehow to be together, working, resisting, researching, bringing on to the surface all this history, so we can start talking more openly about ourselves and our bodies and our history. So I believe nature is also it's also us. I mean, it's not something else that it's over there, right? It's not the territory, it's not the landscape. It's our body, it's ourselves. So thank you, Lorena. Thank you, Lorena, for allowing us to make these deep thoughts with you and with your crew and with your researchers, friends, other artists that collaborates with you. So thank you for allowing us to be part of this.
Thank you, Sofia. Thank you, Leah, for expanding the conversation together, expanding, our ways of practicing our own forms of memory and engagement with where we are and what we do.
Thank you both. Lorena, you are truly a connector and collaborator, I think, even in sort of bringing this conversation together. So I've enjoyed working with you so much and getting to know Sofia. I hope that I can see the show.
Yes, me too. What we're going to do about that?
Our show's up till December 7th. It's coming up pretty quick, but I invite anyone in to see it. I'd love to tour people through it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you both. Muchas gracias a todos. Gracias por acompañarnos. Y
Gracias.
pues bueno, nos encontramos pronto.
Un abrazo.